Everyone knows that Tokyo is an expensive place to live. Apparently, it is also a rather expensive place to die. If you die in most parts of Japan, the local government will usually cremate you either free of charge or for a relatively modest fee. In many municipalities, the cost is somewhere under 20,000 yen. But in Tokyo's 23 wards, the basic cremation fee at the company handling most of the city's cremations is now 87,000 yen. That's more than 4 times what people pay in many other parts of the country. And this is not the cost of a funeral. It doesn't include a wake, a ceremony, flowers, a coffin, or any of the other expenses normally associated with saying goodbye to somebody. We're talking about cremation itself. So why does it cost so much more to die in Tokyo? The answer has a lot to do with the rather unusual way Tokyo's cremation system developed. Throughout most of Japan, crematoriums are operated by local governments. In fact, roughly 98% of the approximately 1,300 crematoriums around the country are publicly operated. Tokyo's 23 wards are an important exception. For historical reasons, going all the way back to the Meiji period, private companies became heavily involved in cremation services in Tokyo, and that arrangement survived even after the national government adopted the principle that crematoriums should normally be operated by local governments. Today, most cremations in the 23 wards are still handled by private facilities. One private operator alone runs more than half of the crematoriums serving central Tokyo. And that creates a rather unusual situation. Cremation in Japan is not exactly an optional consumer service. As a rule, bodies are cremated before burial, and cremation has become an essential part of what happens after virtually every death in the country. In most of Japan, local governments recognize that public character by subsidizing the service heavily. Residents, therefore, pay only a fraction of what cremation actually costs. Tokyo has traditionally taken a different approach. The metropolitan government has generally operated on the principle that the person using the service should bear the cost. And even Tokyo's publicly operated crematorium charges nearly 60,000 yen for its services. The private sector price is substantially higher. The basic fee charged by Tokyo's largest private operator has risen to 75,000 yen, and then, in 2024, jumped another 20%. It eventually reached 90,000 yen. This April, it was reduced slightly to 87,000 yen. But even at that level, it is about twice what it was about 15 years ago. Until recently, residents of Tokyo's 23 wards could qualify for a special discounted funeral program that reduced the cremation cost to around 60,000 yen. But that arrangement was discontinued this spring. The wards have now introduced a subsidy intended to bring the effective cost for residents back down to roughly the same level. So, in a sense, we have come full circle. Families can again pay something closer to 60,000 yen, but now part of the difference is being picked up by taxpayers. And that raises the larger question. Should cremation in Tokyo really operate primarily as a private commercial service in the first place? There's another side to this, of course. The company operating most of these facilities argues that the price is not simply profit. Its president said last year that out of a 90,000 yen cremation fee, only about 10,000 yen represented profit. The rest went towards labor, utilities, taxes, and the considerable cost of operating and maintaining crematorium facilities. The company also argued that it has been increasing capacity in order to meet growing demand. So this is not necessarily a simple story of some evil corporation exploiting grieving families. The more fundamental question is whether an essential service of this kind should depend so heavily on private operators, particularly when those operators face relatively little direct control over what they charge. And that question is becoming more important because Japan is entering what some people have rather grimly called a high-death society. Japan's population is aging, and the number of deaths is expected to continue to rise for years. That means greater demand for crematoriums at precisely the time many local governments are struggling with aging facilities, limited budgets, and opposition to building new ones. Tokyo itself is already concerned that its cremation capacity may eventually become insufficient. And in some large Japanese cities, families are reportedly already waiting a week or even 2 weeks before cremation can take place. That's not merely an inconvenience. It means families must arrange for the body to be stored while they wait, often creating additional expenses at an already difficult time. So Japan is facing two related problems. First, how much should families themselves be expected to pay for cremation? And second, who should be responsible for ensuring that sufficient cremation capacity exists as the population ages? The Tokyo metropolitan government is now asking the national government for stronger legal authority over privately operated crematoriums. There has also been a discussion about converting some private facilities to public operation. But buying existing crematoriums would obviously cost an enormous amount of money. The Mainichi Shimbun, in an editorial published recently, suggested what may be the more realistic solution. Instead of purchasing the facilities themselves, the governments should simply provide more public assistance towards the cost of cremation. In other words, treat cremation more like the essential public service that it effectively is. And I think that is where the story becomes much more interesting than simply saying that cremation in Tokyo costs 87,000 yen. Japan has spent decades preparing for an aging society. We hear constantly about pensions, medical care, nursing homes, declining population, and the shrinking workforce. But an aging society eventually becomes something else as well. It becomes a society with a very large number of deaths, and that creates its own infrastructure problems. There have to be enough funeral facilities. There have to be enough crematoriums. Somebody has to pay for them. Somebody has to operate them. And somebody has to decide how much grieving families should reasonably be expected to pay. Those are not particularly pleasant questions, but Japan is reaching the point where they can no longer be avoided. Tokyo's extraordinarily high cremation fees may simply be one of the first visible signs of a much larger problem that the country is going to have to deal with over the next decade. Living in Tokyo has never been cheap. It turns out that checking out of Tokyo may not be cheap either. This has been Gaijin 50 Plus, and I'll see you in the next one.